would you like to introduce yourself and let us know if you've had any other courses in the social determinants of health?
Um, Hi, everyone. Sorry I missed last week's class. Um, I'm a graduate student at Albany. Um, I'm doing health policy and management, but I have taken classes that address variables that contribute to the social determinants of health. So this is one aspect, like religion and spirituality, that I feel is kind of like it affects how people live their lives in an everyday concrete sense. So I kind of want to see the relationship it had with public health.
Well, we're definitely happy to have you, Oladameji. And do you go by Demeji or Oladameji?
I go by Demiji, but you could call me whatever is comfortable for you.
Okay, well, Oladameji is definitely not difficult to pronounce, so we'll try Deji for now, if that's okay.
All right.
Okay, sounds good. Well, definitely welcome to the class, and you may have seen where we have Blackboard up and running, so if you have any questions about what you see in Blackboard, definitely feel free to reach out to myself or Dr. Cruschetti.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome aboard. And Mohammed, I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself, and similarly to what Demeji just did, if you'd like to just go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us if you've had any exposure to previous coursework in social determinants of health, and just introduce yourself to the group.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you perfectly.
Sorry. So my name is Mohammed Kifat. You guys can call me Mo. I'm a second-year master's student. Well, yeah, second-year master's student. I have one more year left to finish up. I took this class as an elective. It seemed interesting enough for me to take. I wanted to learn a bit more about the concept about spirituality and religion, how and how it affects public health. And you asked also if I've taken classes with social determinants, ma'am?
Yeah, I sure did. Did you have
Yeah.
you had any other exposure?
Me personally, or are you talking about like the class? I've taken classes.
Yeah, have you taken any classes in that, like let's say through your MPH program?
Yeah, I've taken a class like that. In my certificate of public health class, one of those courses. But yeah. Did you?
That sounds really good. And that's great to hear because I know from last week when we all introduced ourselves, a couple of the other students like Victoria and Amanda, they're also in the MPH program, and I believe they're doing social and behavioral health. So it's good to see that we have a diversity of different specializations amongst our MPH students.
Yeah, I actually know Demiji and Amanda. We've had class together.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, we have that class together.
The more the merrier, and that's great that you guys already know each other.
Yeah. Should I unmute every time someone speaks? Should I unmute, or how does this go?
Well, what we're going to do is when we break into the sessions where Dr. Cruschetti and myself start talking, we'll ask all of the students to unmute. And what we can do now is if you'd like to, those of you all who are students, you can go ahead and unmute yourself now. I'm sorry, mute yourself now, and I'll go ahead and get into the agenda for today.
All right.
Thank you, guys. So I was just going to briefly go over our goal for today, which is going to be officially our second session together. However, this week is actually going to be our first official module together. So between myself and Dr. Cruschetti, we have an exciting day planned for you in terms of making sure that we give you a good introduction to what the course logistics will be about for the remainder of the term in terms of some of the theories and practical-based applications that we're hoping to cover together as throughout the term. So what I'll do is I'll definitely make sure that I give you guys just a good overview of the agenda for today. And so we've had our two new students introduce themselves and give their welcome. And then also, we also will be jumping into a little bit of a refresher for some of you on public health ethics. And for others of you who may not be in the field of public health, I'm going to get into the distinctions between public health ethics and clinical ethics, in case there hasn't been any ethics-related coursework that you've taken in the past. And then we're going to watch a brief video. Actually, it's about 20 minutes, about a case study I found about a community in rural England. And they've had some really interesting innovations there in terms of the spiritual nature of the community and how that's affected their population health outcomes. So we're going to watch that video and then probably get into a break, because the goal that Dr. Cruschetti and I have for this semester is that instead of having just 3 hours of rote learning where you guys are just continuously doing things, we definitely want to chunk things out where every 15 to 30 minutes we check in with you guys to see if there's any need for a break. And then also the goal is that we wouldn't be lecturing for 3 hours straight. We would have some chunking of activities and segmented group work where we would have a chance to break up some of that monotony. And so after we have our first break around 4 o'clock, we'll definitely make sure to jump into the next portion of the course, which is going to be a really great overview from Dr. Cruschetti. And then we'll jump into some Q&A. And I do just want to remind everyone that depending on your familiarity with Zoom, there is a toolbar that allows you all to do what's called reactions in Zoom. So you have the choice to raise your hand, let me know yes or no if it's something that I mentioned that you're unclear about. Also, you have the chance to let me or Dr. Cruschetti know if you need us to go slower or go faster in terms of our pacing. And then what's nice is that they have this sort of upvote, downvote option with the thumbs up or the thumbs down. So definitely if there's anything that we discuss like that needs to have sort of a yay, nay vote, you also have that option. And if you want to have a break or you think you need to step away and you want to let us know, feel free to click on the little coffee icon, because that'll mean take a break. So definitely feel free to play around with the different reactions. And throughout the course of the term, Dr. Cruschetti and I will also be monitoring the chat function. And so that way there's always an option to chat with the entire group, or you can chat one-on-one with a specific person in the group. So let's say you had a question for me or a question for Dr. Cruschetti, feel free to definitely jump in and just do an individual one-on-one text or a chat to the group. So all of those functions like reactions and chat are available in your Zoom toolbar. And so we'll definitely be monitoring that over the course of each lecture. I did notice that our course director from 3 years ago, Dr. Barry Sherman, he joined us again, and we're definitely excited to have him join us. And so some of you all may have met him last week. He was actually the co-author of the journal article that we put in the preterm orientation packet. So Dr. Barry Sherman will jump in throughout the semester when he can to just provide his thoughts and also just be a part of the class. But we're really excited to have his expertise, and also Dr. Jim Cruschetti, one of the former Albany County Health Department commissioners. And I think between the two of them, they add so much depth and expertise to what we're learning in terms of how religion and spirituality affect health outcomes. So without further ado, does anyone have any questions? And feel free to unmute yourself as you ask a question. Did everyone get a chance to take a look at the module readings that were posted into Blackboard for this week? And you can do a thumbs up or an upvote if you'd like to have a chance to let us know if you had some exposure to the different readings. This is our textbook, the book by Doug Oman. And so you all may have seen in the announcement sections that not only is this book available through the SUNY Albany bookstore, but one of our classmates, Catherine Ramos, who's not with us today, she also found a PDF version that's available through Google Drive. So one thing that's great about this class is that, you know, there's definitely no requirement to purchase any textbooks. So if you had any questions about the module 1 readings, which would include 2 chapters from this book. The first chapter, and also there's a chapter that we required, which was related to clinical practice, religion, and spirituality. Those were 2 of the readings for today. Plus, we had some shorter readings for you all from some different journal articles. So I hope that everyone had a chance to go into Blackboard. It's listed under course materials, and we have the Module 1 readings in this folder. So if you haven't had a chance to take a look at them, definitely make sure to read them in advance of our first discussion question, which will be due next Sunday for the discussion prompt. So if no one has any questions about the readings or anything that stood out to you, I guess I'll go ahead and start with the presentation. So what I'd like to do first is just jump into a little bit more about public health ethics, and just thinking about the idea that when we talk about public health ethics, we really are thinking about the idea of the tenets of social justice. So, you know, in the courses that you all may have taken related to social determinants of health, one of the things that most likely stood out to you was this idea of how sort of community health and population health are definitely bound by certain uncontrollable and controllable factors that may be present in a community or even within a person's household that may affect his or her health adversely. So what's interesting about that is when we talk about public health, it's intricately linked with social justice. And so social justice is really one of the most basic and widely understood aspects of public health ethics. And so when we think about public health ethics, one of the things that is important is just thinking about the idea of how we want to have a way to make sure that we're giving the people who are our clients, i.e. members of the community, a way to have a fair voice in the type of treatment or the type of health interventions that we're offering them. So if we think about public health in terms of sort of a common good, we as the epidemiologists, as the social behavioral health specialists, as health educators, and also even as clinicians and environmental health specialists, the goal of our work is to make sure that what we're doing in a community involves some aspect of a fair distribution of common advantages, and also making sure that it's no distribution of any disadvantages that are done in a disproportionate or unfair way. So we want to make sure that among racial groups, ethnic groups, and also religious groups, that the communications that we have with the community are done in a way that allow the community to feel as if there's a fair distribution of both benefits and risks. So what I like to think about with ethics is the idea that we are working with a social justice framework, but we're also working in a manner that allows our clients, i.e. the community, to understand that we're actually working to improve the global health of a community, but we also want to have respect for autonomy, bodily integrity, and privacy. And public health professionals, our goal would be non-discrimination. And so one of the reasons why I decided to add as this first module is you all are ultimately developing a final project where you have a chance to work on what's a faith-based community. And so what's interesting about that is that, you know, we're going to work one-on-one with you to make sure that we hopefully link you up with a local faith-based community here in the Capital District. Or we can also work with you to create sort of a hypothetical needs assessment or a program proposal that would actually be able to be implemented in the faith-based community in the future. But either way, however your final project direction goes, it'll be important for you to have a basic idea of the importance of ethics in public health. And so, you know, one of the ways the CDC defines it is the systematic process of clarifying, prioritizing, and justifying possible courses of public health action based on ethical principles, values, and beliefs of stakeholders, as well as scientific and other information, including epidemiologic and surveillance information. So what's important here is that when you're in a community, there's an importance to think of your clients not just as clients, but also as important stakeholders. You know, it's really common in public health and other types of psychosocial sciences to think of the client as someone who we're doing work on or someone that we are doing research on, and that that person's voice doesn't necessarily have any weight in our decision making. But ethical decision making really involves thinking about our clientele as people who are equal stakeholders and who have voice in the decisions we make about our public health interventions. And so, you know, one of the things that this reminds me of is the idea of community-based participatory research, and that's something that we'll discuss a little bit later in the course. But I just wanted to draw your attention to the idea that, you know, in clinical ethics, which is i.e. the medical framework, where you're thinking about one-on-one interactions between a medical provider and a patient, there's a slight distinction between those types of clinical ethics and also the ethics that you'll have in a field of public health, where you're actually dealing with more community level, macro level initiative to have an intervention that would be beneficial for the community. So this is a really good table I found from the CDC, and I'll link the source in Blackboard if you guys want to take a look further at the CDC's framework for public health ethics. But it really helps break down the idea that in public health ethics, we're really looking at how social determinants of health can be sort of reframed in a way that doesn't necessarily impinge upon the economic, social, and cultural rights of an individual to have a benefit from scientific advances. Whereas in clinical medicine and also clinical research, it's very much attention to this idea of beneficence, justice, and also informed consent. And those are principles that are very much related to the Belmont Report, which was one of the outcomes of historical research that's been done in Guatemala and also in Tuskegee, Alabama, where there were lapses in judgment in terms of allowing participants in those particular studies to have any type of understanding of what exactly the procedures were that were going to be done to them. So in clinical medicine, you'll hear a lot about the Belmont Report, whereas in public health, we don't necessarily have a set standard beyond the guidelines that the CDC has issued related to thinking about the focus on institutions and populations, and also the idea of advocacy and avoiding social harm. So what I'd like to know a little bit more about is whether or not any of you think you may have had any exposure to any situations in your previous, whether it's a work setting or even in a setting where you had an internship or even in a community setting where you may have been sort of exposed to something that led you to think about how ethics may apply either in a public health setting or in a clinical setting. Feel free to unmute yourself if you have any examples of any sort of prior training you may have had in ethics or any examples of something you may have dealt with in your personal or professional life that dealt with the idea of how health and ethics sort of interrelate. So if you have any examples, we'd love to hear them. And then I know that in a lot of the public health courses in the School of Public Health, some of them do include a module on ethics, but it's not necessarily consistent across all departments. So I'm not exactly sure if any of you have covered ethics in previous courses, but feel free to give me a thumbs up or a, raised hand if you have any sort of examples of that you'd like to share.
Hey Mo, I think you're on mute.
Can you hear me?
So Abby, while the students are thinking of experiences where they encountered a scenario, I can give you a real world experience from the health department when it was probably 5 or 6, nope, it was probably 10 years ago now, we had a very serious outbreak of influenza. And there was a vaccine shortage that created serious problems because this particular influenza outbreak was affecting kids, and it led to hospitalizations of toddlers. And some of the images out of the Midwest where children were in intensive care units really drove up the demand for vaccine. But not only was it affecting children, adults and the elderly is usually a high-risk population, were experiencing adverse outcomes, including deaths. So we were faced in the local health department with the challenge of standing up public vaccination clinics with a limited amount of vaccine, with lots and lots of people calling our department asking for vaccine. And at that time, we really had to make a decision. How do we go about bringing our vaccine into public settings and making sure those who are at highest risk got it? And at that time, I consulted Dr. John Balint, who was an ethicist at Albany Medical Center, because we really wanted to make sure that we were being as fair as possible with the delivery of vaccine. And he was a tremendous help for us. And we prioritized based upon his recommendations so that those who are most vulnerable were able to get the vaccine. And we had some solid grounding for turning other people away. And the fact that we consulted with somebody who was really an expert in ethics really helped us to get the support we needed for providing vaccine to those at highest risk. Thankfully, more vaccine became available, but for a long period of time, it was a huge public health challenge for us. And ethics played a key role in our decision-making back then.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Dr. Cruschetti.
So I have an example from, I work at Capital Roots, which is a healthy food access organization in Troy. And so during COVID, we were all switched to like emergency food access. So a lot of the people that we serve are in like older, low income housing spaces. And so what was happening was a lot of us were being like sent out to the housing complex where there was like high numbers of cases of COVID. And because they're already in like an at-risk group, us coming in and like bringing food and stuff, and then everybody coming out and gathering to like come get the food and everything was this kind of big decision that my CEO had to make, and like how we were gonna kind of go about it, because it is a population that not only was at high risk in like a COVID sense, but in just the general way that our social system works. This is a group that is already underserved by our system. So we had to figure out like new ways to kind of handle everything while people were still getting services and we weren't putting them at a greater risk for contracting COVID.
That's a really good example, Amanda, for sure. And I could see how you had to weigh the risks and benefits of that as an organization. So thank you for sharing that. And Deji and Mo, and also Victoria, do you guys have any examples to share?
I might, sorry, is someone else speaking?
No.
No, go ahead.
I have an example, but it's not public health related.
That's fine, definitely. This is a good way to brainstorm ethics as a whole.
All right, and I don't want no more judgment about this. I had I think when I was completing financial aid, so in order for me to get a certain amount of money in financial aid, I would have to like meet the requirements in I think there's like a range, a salary range for my dad's taxes, my parents' taxes. We were off by like just a little off the margin. So thought about like lying about it. So I would get the, in this case, the risk and benefit. The benefit would be extra money from my financial aid, but the risk is just getting caught. So I ended up not doing it. That's the only one I have.
And that's important, sort of the idea of thinking about sort of like the pros and cons and the risk benefit ratio. It was definitely something that it's good that you had that mindset to sort of think in a deeper perspective. And so it's definitely something that is not uncommon of a situation to fall into, especially with the rising cost of college tuition and costs. So definitely that's something that may seem extreme, but actually it's a very relatable thing. So thank you for being brave enough to share that.
That's fine. And also because, at that time when I was doing it, a lot of my friends were doing they were doing this, they were doing the same thing. But my thing was in the future, about like in the consequences about getting caught or just lying on taxes or stuff like that. But yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And so that's something that I'm glad that you also mentioned, is that whether it's the scenario that Dr. Cruschetti mentioned with the vaccines, or either Amanda's scenario with the Capital Roots, or even this situation that you mentioned, the common theme is thinking about in what ways can we ensure that what we decide ultimately won't necessarily have an adverse disadvantage. And so I think that's what's important, is that in all three scenarios, you're thinking about sort of the bigger picture. And that's something that public health ethics definitely allows us to really think about in terms of how we, as sort of the creators and also the ones who are writing proposals for the needs of those in a community, it really forces us to think about sort of how we can think about not only our self-interest, but also the greater interest of who will ultimately be our clients and stakeholders. So definitely thank you all for participating in this exercise. And I'm trying to think, let's see, Dr. Sherman, I see he just joined us again. Dr. Sherman, if you want to unmute yourself, do you have any examples of any situations where you dealt with ethical decision-making in terms of your public health career? I know you're retired now, but if you have anything to share, feel free to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, I'm sorry, I missed I had to leave temporarily, so I missed it entirely.
That's fine. Thank you for joining us.
Okay, I'm sorry I got interrupted. I'm back now.
So Dr. Sherman, we were talking a little bit about the distinction of clinical ethics and also public health ethics. And I was thinking that since you had a 30 plus year career, just like Dr. Cruschetti in the field of public health, I was curious if you had any examples of applications of public health ethics that you may have encountered at some point.
Oh boy, you caught me a little off guard. Let me think a little bit about that.
That sounds good. Think on it, and we can always double back to that later.
Okay.
That sounds good. So if anyone doesn't have any other thoughts, I guess if it's okay with you all, does anyone have any preference for having a short break now, or would you guys like to jump into the video? And you can feel free to use the reactions tool or send me a chat.
How long is the break? Is it 10 minutes?
Well, we were thinking that we would have at least 2 5-minute breaks and at least 1 10-minute break. So we can have a 5-minute break now if people are interested.
It's up to the class. It doesn't matter to me.
We do have one other student who's trying to log in. Her name is Donna, and so she still hasn't logged in. So if we do take a 5-minute break, it might allow me to resend her the instructions and make sure she's all set. So if everyone's okay with it, oh, I do see one down vote for a break. If I was thinking, if you guys don't mind, maybe we'll take a 3 or 4 minute break until 3:36 and just see if we can get the other student to join in that time frame, if that's okay. So what we'll do now is we'll take the quick break, and since I've heard from 2 students so far who did vote for the break. I'll go ahead and we'll regroup right at 3:36 if that's okay.
Sure.
Okay, sounds good. And what I'll do is I'll get the video ready so we can start back, and I'll check on the other students. Okay, everyone. I guess we'll get back into the course now. So what I'd like to do is just introduce you guys briefly to this short documentary that we're going to watch. It's actually based on a scenario for a small rural town in the United Kingdom. And this actually will be the basis of our discussion exercise that's going to be due next Sunday. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start playing. And if anyone needs me to adjust the audio, please feel free to send me a chat in the chat queue to let me know if the audio is working or if you need me to adjust the volume. So what I'll do is I'll start playing it now, and I'll look out for any reactions in Zoom or any sort of feedback in the chat room about whether or not you can hear it. So I'll press play now, and we can start watching.
If you head to the northwest corner of England past Lancaster towards the Lake District, you come to the market town of Kendal. Population 28,000, Kendal has 2 castles, 2 museums and 5 shopping arcades. It's famous for its historical architecture and energising Kendal mint cake. Mountaineers, apparently. And being just a few miles from the breathtaking Lake District, Kendal's a popular tourist destination. Kendal was also the setting for a recent major study in the sociology of religion and belief, a study that suggested we're undergoing a spiritual revolution. Some form of spirituality is probably as old as society. The prehistoric monument Stonehenge, erected about 5,000 years ago, was almost certainly a place of worship, somewhere sacred. In his classical study of early religion, Emil Durkheim defined the sacred as those things set apart from everyday life. And organised religions are unified systems of beliefs and practices around sacred things. Religions offer explanations of the world and lay down rules believers are expected to follow. The parish church in Kendal is an impressive monument to a time when religion, almost everyone believed in God and went to the services. But as societies modernised, religion began to lose its authority, a process known as secularisation.
Secularisation theory has been one of the major theories in sociology, and very broadly it means the decline of religion.
In 1850, census data suggested that more than half the population of Britain attended church. But 100 years later, it was down to a quarter, and at the turn of the century, it was less than 10%. For many sociologists like Max Weber, the decline of religion was an inevitable part of the rationality of modern life.
As society gets more modern, more democratic, more educated, that there's a natural tendency for religious belief to decline because it just doesn't make any sense, it doesn't fit with what we know about the world, and also we don't need it anymore. We have other ways of making sense of the world. So that was one of the sort of claims.
So secularisation theory argues that whereas religion was once a major part of everyday life, today for most people it's just for Christmas and special occasions, or not at all. But not all sociologists agree.
Secularisation theory was really influential for well over 100 years. And it's only really since the late 1980s that it came to be really seriously called into question.
So in this sort of claim, rather than religion disappearing, it's just taking new forms and perhaps even spreading, as it were, escaping from the churches and institutional religion and spreading across the social landscape.
Some people started to talk about sacralisation. So it's exactly the opposite of secularisation. Secularisation is about decline of religion, and sacralisation is about the growth of religion.
So is the sacred disappearing from our lives, or is it re-emerging in different forms? This was the starting point for the Kendall Project.
So we thought, well, all these arguments are raging all around. Let's do some research and get some empirical evidence, and let's test them. Let's see what's really happening on the ground.
So we thought the best way to do that was to take a particular locality, a particular town, and study everything that was going on where people, more than one person, was getting together for religious or spiritual purposes for 2 years to try to capture not just how much was going on, but also the qualities of it and what it meant in people's lives, and perhaps the different function that religion and spirituality was performing for modern individuals today.
So the aim of the research was to use one town a bit like a laboratory to see if the sacred and spiritual were declining or changing. But why choose Kendall?
We chose Kendall for a very practical reason, which was that we're all at the University of Lancaster and Kendall's not that far away, so we could get there every day and do really thorough research on it. But we were also looking for a town, any town in England, which was small enough for the 5 people who were involved in the project to really get to know, so we could be sure that we'd found most of what was happening in that town. And there was another reason. We wanted somewhere that was isolated enough that if people were going to do religious things, go to church and so on, they'd do it in that town.
So was spirituality in Kendall declining, or was it simply changing? How did the researchers try to find out? What did they discover? The Kendall Project was about testing secularisation and sacralisation theory in one place. And this meant not only looking at all congregational religion in the town, but also at the holistic domain, such as New Age and pre-Christian religions, and alternative spiritual practices such as Tai Chi, reflexology, transcendental meditation, and yoga. But doesn't including things like reflexology and yoga push the idea of spirituality too far?
We were concerned when we did the study of spirituality that spirituality is very broad, and some forms might not be religious at all. So quite a lot of people we talked to said, yes, I go to yoga, but that's just 'cause I've got a bad back, you know, and I'm really a Christian, or I'm completely atheist, or it doesn't have any spiritual significance. After we'd mapped every kind of spirituality, say, for example, you know, the 20 yoga groups, or however many there were, then we talked to all the leaders of the yoga groups, and we said, would you describe what you're doing as purely medical, physical? Does it have a mental dimension, or does it have a spiritual dimension as well? And unless they mentioned that it had a spiritual dimension, we didn't count them.
There were 3 stages to the Kendall research. The first was getting the numbers.
In terms of the congregational domain, that was fairly easy. You could go into the Tourist Information Centre and get a list of all the church services that were happening in Kendall.
But it was really hard to find alternative spirituality, because it's often done in houses and not advertised. So that took almost 2 years, the mapping.
It started really with our researcher Ben, who was our researcher on the ground on the holistic domain, going to various sites in Kendall where he could gather information, shops, centres, also just looking at directories. There are various magazines for alternative healing and alternative spirituality. So he spent many months just gathering as many names and addresses and so on, and then going out and talking to these people, telephone interviews and so on.
This is the Om sign. You'll see it around a lot, particularly if you go to India, you'll see it absolutely everywhere. It is It is supposed to be the symbol which represents the sound of Mother Earth. So I have put it in here in small stones, and I've also got it on my drum.
I call on earth to bind my spell, air to speed its travel well, fire draw spirit from above, water quench my spell with love, so mote it be. I was initiated as a witch 22 years ago tomorrow, and I have trained up in it, and I have seen some amazing things while doing it, working for healing and for enlightenment.
So he was mapping the whole terrain, and that was the first challenge, really, just to find out what was there.
The second challenge was then to get a deeper understanding of religious and alternative spiritual practices through qualitative research, participant observation and interviews.
So we took a handful of churches, a handful of kinds of alternative spirituality, and the researchers just spent a lot of time participating in and observing what was going on in those.
I visited every single church in Kendal and attended a service and took detailed field notes of what was happening in the service and talked to people before and afterwards to try and get a good sense of what that particular community was like.
For some people, I'm sure it's just an underlining of something that they've already done, already had, always has been there in their life. But I would like to think that it takes people on, it moves people on, it says to them, there's more than just ordinary life that's going on here.
And similarly, in the holistic milieu, everybody was visited or spoken to get an understanding of what they were doing, really.
What are they doing? How often do they meet? But also, what are their beliefs? What are their practices? And that involved a lot of interviews, a lot of going along to these groups and so on.
And I've had some incredible experiences running fire walks for hundreds of people, or say at Yule dancing around a cauldron and getting huge flames licking up in spirals 7 feet tall in purples and greens, and all sorts of amazing things. Yeah, really lovely visions, healings.
I believe that my garden is a sacred space. That's been my attempt in putting everything in. Everything that's been planted here, everything we've done here is about trying to enhance the energy of this particular piece of ground. We've made the energy so strong that actually the energy is moving out and into the village.
So we built a sort of a snapshot of each of these so we could start to characterise them and classify them.
The third stage was getting information from individuals through questionnaires.
After having got a good understanding on the ground of what was going on through the initial mapping and the case study work, a questionnaire was distributed in the congregational domain. The questionnaire was distributed to members of all of the case study churches, and this was designed to give us quantitative information to test out, if you like, the claims that we were starting to make on the basis of the more in-depth case study work.
We started off quite generally mapping everything, and then we, if you like, kind of drilled down and spent time in particular congregations and then talking to particular people. But there was a final element or rationale for combining, and that was triangulation, where you kind of cross-check, you test out this method. You know, in the interview they might have said this. Does that agree with what we're getting on the questionnaire? And does it agree with what we're actually observing when we look at the practices? So using lots of methods is a good way of testing them against one another and building up a kind of robust finding.
So what was happening on the ground in Kendal? How many people were attending congregational services? To find this out, the Kendal team didn't do sampling. Rather, they counted every single person going to one of Kendal's 23 churches on one ordinary Sunday in November.
Yeah, one of the most dramatic days it took us months to prepare for was when we went to Kendal to do a count of people going to church We started to call it a body count, but that sounded a bit like a massacre, so we called it head count in the end.
And we deposited teams of students at the doors of every church in Kendal with very strict instructions and tally sheets, and they counted every person that went through the doors of every church in Kendal. It was a massive logistical enterprise.
The survey showed there were 2,175 active congregational worshippers on that Sunday, 7.9% of the population of Kendal, which was very much in line with the national trend of declining church attendance. But what about those practicing alternative spiritualities? How were they counted?
With alternative spirituality, it's not necessarily organised on a weekly cycle. It might be a monthly cycle, or it might be people dipping in and out of practice over a longer period. And also, there isn't the same sense of obligation in many of these practices to turn up every week or at every meeting. So it was quite a complicated process to try and come up with numbers that we felt we could compare.
So we tried to think of it a bit like a church and say, well, in a typical week, how many people would be going to a spiritual group or to have a spiritual one-to-one treatment?
By talking to group leaders, the Kendal researchers estimated that in any given week, about 650 people were taking part in alternative spiritual practices. 1.7% of the population of Kendal, far higher than had been expected.
I mean, the biggest surprise, the thing that Kendal became famous for, was how much alternative spirituality there was.
So while the congregational domain was in sharp decline, the holistic milieu was growing. And if current trends continue, by 2025, more people will be participating in alternative spiritualities than in congregational Christianity.
It was these trends that led the Kendal team to suggest that we might be seeing a spiritual revolution rather than just secularization. But the next problem was to try to explain these findings.
The Kendal team's research confirmed the steady decline in attendance at congregational church services, but also found a significant increase in alternative spiritual practices.
I think more and more people are actually questioning the tenets of whatever faith they've been brought up with, and so perhaps organised religion isn't enough for them.
Well, I was always very religious, and my family's nominally Christian, so I actually sought to get confirmed at 18, but I found it an awful experience. You know, it was very much crowds of people trying to get the communion from the bishop, me getting pushed aside. It wasn't my special day or anything, and I found it very sort of bureaucratic and job's worth, really, and I wanted the mysteries.
So how might we explain these changes in religion and belief sociologically?
Sociology of religion wants to explain religious change in relation to wider social change. It wants to link religion to wider society. And we gave a partial explanation. We didn't say it was the whole explanation, but we talked about a much wider cultural turn, a turn to the self.
That generally in society there is a decline in turning to external sources of authority and more of a turn towards oneself and one's own experience.
I think life is much more unsettled, much more individualised. We have to make up our own life story in a way.
And spirituality goes along with that. You know, it really chimes with that way of being a human being. Spirituality is about finding the God within, exploring my inner depths, saying that the sacred comes really close to me. I can know the sacred with my own intuition and experience. I don't need a church, I don't need a priest, I don't need dogma to tell me about the sacred. The sacred's right here in my own life.
So in this explanation, we're seeing changes in religious behaviour because we're now living in a much more individualistic consumer culture. You no longer have to accept the religion and beliefs handed down to you. You can shop around and find the one that works best for you.
I think that's really important, that people develop a system that, or a belief that works for them, whatever it happens to be. Whereas in prescribed religions, there tends to be a set of rules and you all follow them. I don't think life's like that.
And we've been freed to take advantage of what people call the spiritual supermarket. Not such a bad thing if you can pick and choose something that works and works for you and has that magic.
The global village continues, if you like. We can take more examples from other faiths, other beliefs, and we want to experiment with them. And I understand why people do that. That can, unfortunately, result in people having a bit of a pick and mix attitude to religion and to faith and to spirituality.
Another major change in contemporary culture has been the position of women.
One of the most significant findings from the project wasn't just that there was a lot of spirituality going on, it was that it was predominantly a world of women. In fact, 80% of the people involved were women. So it was very much a women's kind of religion. And no one had ever noticed that before or been able to see how predominantly female it was.
One triangle represents the male energy, the other triangle represents the feminine energy. They are both equal and they are both balanced. We have had the domination of male energy and male power, and that's why we're in the mess we're in now. But we have a wonderful opportunity for change.
But how much can we generalise from Kendal? How representative is it? After all, there were no temples, mosques or synagogues.
It's true that because we were looking at Kendal, we didn't look at Islam, we didn't look at Hinduism or other forms of religion.
And an obvious next step would be to look at a more ethnically diverse town.
I think some of the people who we've talked to who study Islam say that some of the kinds of things we found in Kendal we could also have found within Islamic communities.
While there seems to be a rise perhaps in attendance in other faiths, again, in I think a UK context, I think again for them they will find that will decline as materialism, as individualism, as consumerism begins to bite in all religions, and I think they will find the same things happen.
The Kendal research began with the question secularisation or sacralisation, and it seems there's something of both. Secularisation because people continue to turn away from the idea of an all-powerful God who comes to us mediated by religious bureaucracies. But that doesn't mean we're becoming a nation of atheists as predicted in secularisation theory. The evidence from Kendal and elsewhere suggests that the majority of people are still seeking some form of spirituality to help them make sense of their lives. But increasingly in this individualistic age, they're not looking for it out there in organised religion, but rather in here, deep within themselves.
I see myself as a spiritual being having a physical life. I think that's the most important thing for me.
I wanted the mysteries, so I looked around quite a lot, and eventually one day I found paganism and I had that instant, that's what I want.
Of course, the Kendal findings still need to be tested in other locations and on different religions. But it's come to be seen as one of the most important pieces of research ever done in the sociology of religion and belief.
But 10 years down the line, what do the researchers think of it now?
I feel very privileged to have taken part in this study. That's the first thing I think of when I think of the study. People opened their doors to me and talked to me about things that were to them.
We had a great team of people. We had a very challenging. We set ourselves and we worked really hard at trying to answer it. It's great fun.
If sociology is founded on secularisation theory, if all the great classical sociologists thought modernisation means secularisation, then sociology needs to do some really quite serious rethinking about some of its fundamental premises.
All Okay, can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
And you can vote up or just say yes. Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Okay, perfect. So did anything in the video jump out to anyone in terms of what we've been talking about so far? I think at least for me, it definitely helped me of spirituality, but feel free, anyone, if you want to sort of mention anything that jumped out to you in the video.
I think
And feel free
something
to unmute yourself. Go ahead.
something that jumped out to me, maybe it's just like, I think that this is like an American perspective on it, but it was like everybody was white in the video. So I think that like when, especially looking at it from like the video seemed to take it from like a very Christian perspective, I kind of thought it was interesting how they were like explaining spirituality, and I wonder what the study would have been like if they had like researchers that weren't coming from like a Christian background, or from more like, I guess just having more of a diverse group looking at it, because I wonder what like the definition of what they considered spirituality and stuff, because like the yoga part of the video was really interesting. I do teach yoga, and I was really fortunate to have learned from like teachers from India, and like the idea of separating like the like physical practice of yoga and like spirituality doesn't like kind of exist, but like in Western culture we've definitely made it like a separate thing. So it was an interesting perspective, and I think watching it like as an American is kind of like you view things differently than they probably did like working over there.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Amanda, because in some ways that brings about the idea of who are the researchers, sort of what are the baseline attitudes, knowledge, and belief of who's doing the research. And so that can definitely be an important consideration when we think about not just public health practice, but also public health ethics. And you're absolutely right. I've definitely seen in some yoga contexts I've been in how, people may not necessarily understand the true theology behind how yoga began. So it's really good to know that you are one of the yoga instructors who's trying to make sure to learn the true meaning of it and the historical significance of it. So thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely.
Does anyone else have any thoughts on the video?
Yeah, I thought it was very interesting too. For me, I just thought it was interesting how they kind of, I guess they kind of hit on a point that I feel like in this new age, people are kind of a digital age. People, I guess this depends on obviously like where you live, because if you live in a more, I guess, democratic society, you could probably have more opportunities to think for yourself instead of having the doctrine passed down to you, and this is what you're expected to believe, and this is what this is how you should act in a certain way. But in a town like that, in a democratic society, it's more, they said that they believe that when they were looking at people who were doing their own spiritual or they weren't necessarily following, they didn't go to church every Sunday, that type, they didn't count them, but they said it was more than expected. And I feel like, just in my own like personal experience too, like I feel like that's how people, at least here, kind of, they come in with a certain belief, maybe from their parents or something, and then they kind of divulge into maybe their own blend or their own theology in a sense. And it's not necessarily like religion.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Deji, because I have to admit that even myself, when I was watching the video, when the woman, she mentioned something about her confirmation, like I was also raised Catholic, but I only got up as far as getting the first communion when I was like 7 or 8 years old. So I never got the formal confirmation that most people get as a teenager. And so in my case, as I got older, it started to become more a blend of, acknowledging the Catholicism in my family, but also acknowledging the Islamic members of my family. And so also thinking more about how the principles from both religions are definitely applicable. And so blending in that idea of Western culture and also non-Western culture. So I definitely agree with you, Deji, that it definitely had a specific lens to it. And that's something we have to think about. Thank you for sharing that. Does anyone else have anything to mention? Victoria or Mo, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah. What I was gonna say is, give me 1 second. I'm out of breath. What I was gonna say is, I think we've seen the shift like over centuries. Like if you look back, how religion was like a big aspect in human life, right? So religion was a bigger aspect than Scientology or science. There were small groups of people who believed in science using mathematics and stuff like that to solve equations for anything, I guess, for the universe, try to explain certain things, and they were shunned upon as back then. But I think there has been a shift over the last couple hundred years. People have been focusing on trying to prove the unknown, trying to see if they can make sense of the things that they don't know about. So so I think today, like what Dimenji said was I agree on that, on the fact that we live in a society where we have more free will, freedom to do certain things that we probably once couldn't. Like we couldn't in the earlier days of settlements, that we couldn't go against religion, or something would have been wrong with us. So I think in just today's modern society, and this is happening all over the world too, not just in the States. I'm talking about like places in the Middle East right now. There's like revolutions going on where now everything's becoming more modern, and now there's a lot more free will to think about certain things than there was once before, but not as big as it is today.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. There's a lot more autonomy and freedom of choice now in terms of this idea of, sort of choosing the religion that you are desiring versus the whole thing of being the compulsory nature of years past. So that's a really good point, Mo.
No, no. I was saying that there are more people not believing in religion because they have other things that they want to believe in or do. I feel like religion in that aspect I was saying has once it was, back then it was a bigger aspect in human life, like your life. Now it's like a smaller aspect of your life than because of the modern day. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, that makes sense too, because there's definitely been that cultural shift, and I definitely agree with that. And it's something that will be interesting because I'm going to use this documentary as a source for the discussion prompt that you guys are going to submit next weekend. So in Blackboard, what I'm going to do is extract out the 25 minutes of this clip and also post it to Blackboard. So that way, if any of you guys want to rewatch it, it'll be the basis of the discussion prompt that you guys get in a couple of days. And that'll give you guys some time to go through the reading some more, including the Doug Oman textbook and also what you've read in some of the journal articles. And I think between the readings and also this video, it'll be a really good chance for you all to think about sort of how to apply this in sort of a problem-based learning perspective. So definitely thank you all three for giving me your thoughts on the video. And what we can do now is transition to the second part of the class, which will be Dr. Cruchetti's lecture. I was going to do a role-playing exercise with you all, but I only have 4 students, and it needed at least 5 students for the different assignments to work. So I'll do the role-playing exercise next week instead. But Dr. Cruschetti, do you want to go ahead and shift gears to your portion or have a short break again? Let us know.
Yeah, I think we should just jump in. I can break after part of my presentation so the students can get up and stretch and take a break.
Okay, sounds good. What I'll
Great.
do, Dr. Cruschetti, is I'll stop sharing my screen so you can go ahead and share yours.
Okay.